to the February 23rd, 2021 workshop, Envision Coeur Lane, which is an update of the city comprehensive plan. Shannon, could we just have a roll call, please?
Messina?
Here?
Fleming?
Here.
Fleming?
Here.
Okay. Ingalls?
Here.
Lutrip?
Here.
Mandel? Rumpler?
Here.
Ward?
Okay, thank you. And Hillary or Sean, whoever wants to.
We'll have Sean go ahead and kind
Yeah.
of give you the intro remarks. Thanks.
Got a little echo going on in here, I think. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how you doing? All right. Thank you, everybody. It looks like Alex is pulling up the PowerPoint for this evening. This is going to be more of an open conversation type of meeting, so we'll be looking for input. Staff will be here to help guide and run the map, and we'll get started. So go ahead with the next slide, Alex. Okay, so welcome everybody. Appreciate your time tonight. This is the second meeting. We haven't done this in quite some time, seems like. Usually we're on the previous meeting like hitting midnight and we're like, oh, we got to have a second meeting. So this is a different concept though. We're working on the comprehensive plan tonight. So tonight we'll have a presentation and discussion. We've discussed this before about place types, the future land use map, and then the relationship to zoning. We'll discuss what the next steps are for the plan and then bring it to a close. So, next slide. So this is where we are in our timeline of events. Bring you back to fall of 2019, we had the kickoff. Got a bunch of great input there then. Winter and spring, we did analysis and preferences where we had a number of different, we had surveys and we had stakeholder meetings. That's when we put together the CAC and focus groups that Planning Commission has sat on. We did some mapping and refinement thereafter. We are now in phase 4, which is the development of the comprehensive plan. So this is where the rubber starts to hit the road, and for tonight we'll be looking for some input on the land use portion of our comprehensive plan. And then in phase 5 we'll have adoption, which will get that underway and bring it forward to City Council ultimately for their approval, or send it back to us for some changes and we'll bring it back. Next slide. All right, so tonight we have 4 goals to reach concerning our conversation about land use. Is confirm the direction of the land use map and where we are, as well as where we're going. It's in draft form right now. Council has told us don't bring us a final product that we would just rubber stamp. They wanted to be involved, get public input, so that's what we're doing tonight. So we're looking for some feedback on where mixed use employment centers and commercial areas would be. Much of the map has been filled out already. There's still some areas that we need feedback on. Bring you back to the game that we did. I actually brought a copy of that if anyone wanted to take a look, but those place types were part of that game. You know, when you're dealing with a board game and squares of these place types, they don't exactly match up to where your the underlying parcels are, and so we're getting to that point and we're looking for some feedback. So one of the things that we have identified through our conversations is that historic districts are going to become a thing. We have a historic preservation ordinance that is in the works right now, and so we would be adding that as a place type, and that is currently underway at MIG. And then also planned unit developments, since they are a master planned community, we don't expect a lot of change. They have built themselves a box that they must live within based upon approval by Planning Commission, and so we're looking for a little bit of feedback on that. Ultimately, staff is recommending that we have a PUD place type where we would put that into the map, and that would show that where the PUDs are around town. So next slide. All right, let's discuss place types. So we have gone over this before, and we'll touch on it lightly again for the benefit of people that may be watching from home. This is something that is new to the plan as far as place types go, but the underlying data that fits in here comes generally from where the comprehensive plan. You can see here where there's some density that's defined in lot sizes that gives a range of what we would tend to see inside of this place type or any place type that has been created, what the characteristics are, so that fits along the lines of where our current comprehensive plan, where Coeur d'Alene tomorrow is for each one of the districts. So this plan doesn't define districts, it has different place types throughout town, and so that's where that aligns. What the transportation would look like, what we would expect the development pattern to be, and the building types. Next slide. As part of this, we talked a little bit with council about how we make that bridge between what the comprehensive plan would recommend or see in the future for the next 20 years of growth in the city of Coeur d'Alene, but also where it would fit in our current zoning map. And so that is what compatible zoning would look like for each one of the place types. The next slide. So here is a digital representation of all of the place types that we have to date. As I had mentioned earlier, we will be adding a historic we're not sure if it's going to be a place type or an overlay. We're still discussing that internally and what would be the best strategy moving forward and how to represent that on a map. So those discussions are happening right now, but you can see all of these different place types from a single family neighborhood all the way up to general industrial and the underlying zoning that would apply or support that type of development. So next slide. So we're going to have a discussion about the future land use map, but before we do that, let's discuss briefly, and I touched on it, what sort of public input that we've had up to this point. So we kicked this off, and I believe it was September of 2019 at the Innovation Collective. We had over 80 attendees, probably closer to 100. We had the game nights. I did bring a copy of that. We had over 100 players and 40 plus games that were played. Great input. We took that input and digitized it so that we could see what sort of development patterns that the players came up with as they went through that exercise. We had a number of public surveys with well over 1,000 applicants and 11,500 plus data points. So great reach out to the public during a pandemic. It became a little difficult. We would normally go out and and stand on a street corner or attend a street fair or something like that and get people's input, but we were very limited during this last year to do that. But MIG really helped us. They stepped up, created digital versions of what we would normally do in the public, and we were able to gather a lot of data that way. We had the leadership committee with a number of meetings, focus groups. I touched on community advisory committee, and we've also had a number of service organizations that have helped out and given us feedback across the board. So next slide. All right, so with that, we've talked about this. So at our last meeting on December 8th, we polled Planning Commission and asked, we had 3 scenarios. And what became of that meeting was some direction from Planning Commission that said, hey, we really like the compact scenario, but there are areas in town where maybe a district might work better or would work in conjunction with that compact scenario. And so we've started to take a look at that, and that's where we're at tonight. So we'll dive in and have a discussion with a map that Alex will be able to run, and we can do things on the fly. It's kind of cool having a digital map that we're able to zoom in and out of and discuss things on the parcel level. So next
Sounds
slide.
good. And I want to just show, thank you, Sean, and I think I've met most people. Once again, my name's Alex Dupie. I'm with MIG and the consultant project manager for this. As Sean mentioned, with Planning Commission and also City Council, the compact scenario was one that kind of came to the top in terms of future development pattern. And so we've added a few images to show kind of some of the differences and what's included within that, but also knowing that the district element, which is focused around those corridors, but in specific nodes, which is a little bit different than the compact, which is more focused right in that interior core. So we just, as Sean said, we just had these up here just to kind of remind you kind of what some of the discussion was at the previous meeting, talk about some of the development types, but also one thing we've added, and we showed this to City Council as well too, in that if you remember from the December meeting, we showed a couple maps. One was vacant lands and another was potentially redevelopable lands. And as you know, Coeur d'Alene has very little vacant land within the city limits. And there is some outside within the ACI, but within the city limits, it's very limited. From a redevelopable land standpoint, though, if you start to look at properties that maybe have kind of outlived their lifespan, maybe are potentially for opportunities for redevelopment. A lot of these are within your commercial core or your commercial areas and your commercial districts. And so I'm showing this because this is an example of actually work that we've been doing within the city of Boise, looking at other commercial corridors and kind of reimagining potentially how redevelopment might occur on some of these larger commercial sites. And so, this is, if you're familiar with State Street in Boise, this is, a main drag, 5 lanes. It's going to be 7 lanes in the next few years. There's a number of commercial properties along that area. Some are more active than others. But what the city is looking at is very similar to what Coeur d'Alene community residents have told us, is that it's important to have shopping and other things close to our house, but also having housing options immediately adjacent and a diversity of housing options immediately adjacent is also important. So why we're showing this is that not necessarily changing the streets per se, but how do you start to think about some of these older, big box retail commercial sites that may either be vacant or, kind of seeing the end of their useful life? How do those transition over time? And so when we think about place types, this is a way to start thinking about some of those commercial areas, maybe a little bit differently, over the next 20 years or so. And so again, we're just showing that as an example of potentially kind of how this might come to be in the future, but also because we're going to be talking about a lot of commercial areas tonight, give you some food for thought about how these areas might be able to transition. So with that, I'm going to move over to the land use map here. And so let me orient you here just for a second. So this map is essentially, it's a web map that we've loaded with the previous scenarios, the district and the compact scenarios, to help provide guidance for where potential land uses might go. It's existing zoning. So this is, I'm showing existing zoning here right now because a key piece of this is that even though we're applying place types on top of zoning as a kind of a future potential kind of way to develop, zoning is not, we're not proposing zone changes right now. And so that's I think the important element is that the zoning isn't proposed to be changed. The place type is really about future development. And so just as an example, I'm going to zoom in here just for a bit. Get a little bit out. And I just want to show you how some of this started to come up. And apologies, it's the aerial slows it down just a little bit. But what you can see here, there's a number of, like if you look at your existing zoning, The red is, commercial properties, purple is your downtown. All of this yellow and green are different types of residential, lower or, medium density, single family residential. And so you see these big blocks of color here that, that signify what is permitted within that. What we've done is start thinking about, from a comprehensive plan standpoint, so loading up. Come on now. Let me turn off the aerial here real quick. It's getting a... Just turn that there. Sorry, it's getting a little slow on me. It's a problem with technology. Sometimes it doesn't quite do what you want it to do. When we started looking at there you go, it's starting to load up. When we started looking at, from a place type standpoint, like this space here with zoning, for example, is industrial, light manufacturing, industrial. When we start applying place types, that area is still, I know what's going on. There we go. That area is still zoned for manufacturing. It still has the same place type, and the place type for these residential areas exactly mimics what is within the existing zoning. So one of the questions from the Planning Commission was, or excuse me, from the City Council was what do we do? What about all of these residential areas? And the question around that is really your residential areas, particularly single-family areas. There's no proposed changes. So those changes are not. There's no proposed changes within those areas. The areas that really could see some changes are more these central spaces that from the scenario plan, either the district or the compact, those are some of the questions that we have about, what should be commercial versus mixed use? Where do we start to place growth, and where would that growth, what would that growth look like over time for a future land use map? And so with that, so Sean, should we zoom in a place to see what we want to talk about?
Sure.
I'm gonna work on this
I
map here just
picked
for a
out a
second.
couple of areas that are probably near and dear to everybody. So let's start off with East Sherman, if that works for you, Alex.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see. My server all of a sudden went slow, so I'm trying to see what we have here. Okay, so East Sherman. All right. All right, so east, that's the one I want right there. There we go. That'll be a little bit better. All right, so from an East Sherman, when we start to look at East Sherman here, you can see that there's a number of areas. Let me put this up here to show that. When we've been looking at East Sherman, you have sub-area maps, a sub-area plan that looks at this area in particular as future mixed use, future commercial, and that is a lot of what the community input told us as well too, as wanting these types of uses within this corridor. And so when we were looking at these areas, if we start to click on one, this area here is zoned C17, which is kind of general commercial. Some of the things that we're starting to look at and that we want input on is, should these areas be really retail center corridor, which is really kind of reserved more for large format retail, or should we start to think of these more as mixed use? And so that's one of the questions we have is that in this corridor, is there a boundary where you would separate that out, or are there specific areas that we'd want to focus on for different types of uses that may start to implement some of those other sub-area plans? And so I think another example would be like this area here too. Sean we were talking about this, which I believe this is a grocery store. Is that right, Sean? Or
Yes,
an
it's a
office?
grocery store and a liquor store on the corner.
So for this use, this is actually R17, which is interesting when you look at the zoning for that compared to some of these others, which are C17. A residential zone probably doesn't fit for that, but so from a mixed use standpoint, you could apply the place type to have mixed use, which would be more of a dynamic space like grocery store, multi-story, 2 to 3 story buildings with retail on the bottom or housing or office on top. So I think that is some of the input we're looking from you tonight is, for these specific areas, I'd say this, and then Apple Way is another one that we wanted to zoom into. Are there things that we should be considering to move this map along? Because ultimately this will be a completed map for the comprehensive plan that'll show future land use.
Mr. Chair, could we ask questions or wait till?
Yeah,
Yes, we would love your input and questions and comments at this time.
So are you anticipating changing the residential areas in any fashion?
No, and that's one, like if you go, for some reason my residential's not turning on here. These areas, like this area is primarily residential, and so if we click on zoning, which is all of this green, all of these areas would stay residential.
Would
either
stay
as-
residential?
Stay residential, either a single family neighborhood or compact neighborhood, which is just based on the parcel size there. So it's pretty much all single family.
So it may be beneficial, and you may have done this, Sean, or Alex, I just may not have noticed it appropriately, that there are very specific, these residential areas are not going to change. They're going to stay the way they are.
Yeah, I think you might see some infill here and there, but it's really based on the existing zoning there if there's a vacant property. But really, there's no proposed change within these areas.
I think that it's, at least people I talk to, it's a very important issue with them. That certainty that the residential areas are going to stay this residential.
Yeah, and I know that was a question with City Council as well too. What happens to the single family areas? And yeah, I think the changes are really within, for example, East Sherman, areas where there's discussion through the public process, in this area here where there's a lot of older commercial development, or areas that have already some varied uses that we might want to look at slightly differently than how they are today. But again, zoning is not changing as a part of this. The zoning is what is allowed today. This is really about how we grow over the next 20 years. So are there things that we should look at within this map to help guide that?
But not growing into residential areas with commercial, et cetera.
Exactly. And I'd expand on that for with some of these commercial areas, should all of these be commercial? There are probably certainly some areas that, will always be large format retail. But for example, some of these smaller areas, should these transition more to mixed use over time as they redevelop?
And so some of the feedback getting to East Sherman is we saw many times throughout the games that were played, as well as the surveys that were given out and taken, is that there's like an employment center that's envisioned somewhere along East Sherman. And so there's, like Alex was talking about with retail, there's large format retail. You need a decent sized area to do an employment center. And so when you start looking at anchoring something such as an employment center and making sure it's near transportation, such as I-90 or something, where does it make sense to place something like that? And so That's part of the reason why we're here tonight, is to pull Planning Commission, have that discussion of what is it that you guys see the future of Coeur d'Alene on East Sherman.
Is it our role to talk about employment centers? I mean, what are we going, the game was fun, but it was just, it was just a game. And what about our professional developers, people earn a living on this stuff and whatnot? Don't they have a say of what they want to put there based on our zoning, as opposed to the city saying, let's put a employment center XYZ here or there? Sort of like a little 5-year plan many years ago in another country.
So this is guidance, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that is what is going to be there. It obviously will take a zone change and lots of investment and, and a building permit and all of those things to realize that. But as we start thinking in terms of how land is used along what used to be known as the Miracle Mile, is there opportunity to provide something such as an employment center there, and where would we envision seeing something like that?
I don't know.
If I understand this, again, I think the underlying zoning is going to dictate, just like it's always has, what can or can't be built, whether it's commercial, residential, the downtown core or stuff. And there's a process for landowners to come in to say, well, I would like to put this there, even though we might designate it as let's say an employment center or whatever. This is just a plan. That's a vision, more so than this is what it's going to be. And I think there's where some of this is getting mixed up as far as what the city is trying to do. And what Alex has done over the 1.5, 2 years that we've been working on this is just a plan. It's not defined. We're really not changing zoning at this point in time, unless that's something that's going to come up, which might be a little bit with the core housing zoning that we're looking at or create. But we're not telling anyone this is what you're going to do. This is just a vision of whatever it might be in certain areas. Everybody still has the same process of coming before us to ask for special use permits, changing of a zoning to this, and then it's up to us to say, okay, that fits, or no, it doesn't, and then there's an appeal process. They can go to the city council. So I think the system is still going to be the same. It's just what we're defining here, which is completely different than whatever we did before, and we're so used to our old comp plan. This is such a new Envision comp plan that we've had so much public input on, which is great, but it's not like this is what we're going to do. This is not, the city is not telling anyone this is what we're going to do. This is just a plan, a guidance for the next 20 years.
We have a pretty good idea who owns all that property up and down East Sherman. Have you met with the property owners to get some feel from them what they sort of envision in that area? Or do we just get it from the general public and the games?
We have a revitalization plan for East Sherman that's been drafted. It hasn't been adopted, but it's pretty far along. And that, there is interest in mixed use and just
So
opportunities.
you've talked to the property owners?
We have,
Okay, very
that's
good,
correct.
thank you.
And I think, just to reiterate, I think Commissioner, or Chairman, sorry, said it exactly right. It's a vision. What would we like to see in the future? It may or may not come to fruition. We're not changing the zoning, but we've heard from the community loud and clear, we'd like opportunities for change. We want more walkability. We want more places for jobs to be located. So that's our role. We're kind of working with the commission, and then the city council will ultimately adopt a future land use map to guide development, to guide those future decisions when someone comes forward and says, I'd like to do, X, Y, or Z. The zoning right now, the C-17, is largely on East Sherman, and that would allow an employment center anyway. But it's kind of like, do we want to say this is an ideal location if someone were to change their use in the future, if they realized what's currently there is not the highest and best use, and they have an opportunity to do some kind of cool, maybe it's just some high-tech, business location where there's different businesses all located together. It doesn't have to be a huge center. It's just providing opportunity for future uses to take place.
And I think we're getting, sometimes it's always, we, you hear the word we all the time, and it isn't we, the city, it's the public, from all the meetings that we've had from the very beginning to when we started doing the game. So this new vision we have came from the public. And what we need to do, and the city council needs to do, and staff is, which we have, is take all that in, go through all these meetings and say, all right, here's our best educated guess of what's going to be in the future. And then the developers and the people who own that land, they'll come in and say, yeah, okay, we're going to build this, we're going to build that, and they can just go about their business because it's the underlying zoning is going to let them do that. Or if not, then they come to us, and then public input is, again, heard, and we continue, just like we always have.
If I just continue, I can understand and support, walkability and things of this nature, but having a specific thing called employment center, I don't know what it is. But if it's some type of concentration of businesses and sort of like we have neighborhood centers now, don't we, in some fashion?
And we have
And
a
so if we
neighborhood.
have something more general like that, I'd feel more comfortable with. But when we get right to something that specific, it just seems like it's too specific. And I'll call back on Schreiber Way when we have our little industrial center out there. And now everything's coming for us where they want to change that to have things different than industrial. And I think that's very good. I think it's good for the community. I think it's good for us. And there's some flexibility, some workability there. And I think whatever we do in the other areas should have the same ability to adjust to the changing circumstances.
Let's step back here just for a second. Sorry, I'm just responding to a comment. Let me open. Let's go back to this just for a second here, because I think this is a good question and one we've been talking about, for the past couple meetings. And Commissioner, to answer your question from the place types are general guidance. So they're not as specific as what you'd see in, for zoning. Like zoning would be very specific on site design, building height, parking, stormwater, lighting, all of those types of things that would go into kind of a review of a project in a development. The place type is more of a general category. And like for this example, it's compact neighborhood. It's kind of what the future might hold, so it provides that guidance. And so I think the question when we think about like East Sherman, for example, if we go to kind of the mixed use, which, C-17 is certainly zoning there, it is more focused on kind of retail, office, retail, residential, commercial, residential. And so those are questions that, that would start to, over time, start to transition or transform a certain area. And I think when we look at, like East Sherman, going back to East Sherman here, going back to East Sherman, a lot of this area is pretty small. They're pretty small parcels. And so, mixed use, smaller buildings, smaller development could fit in this. So like from a place type, what type of fabric are you trying to create with that? Like if it's a big employment center, like maybe this is a big parcel here, maybe that works, but these smaller ones are really, more limited in how they can develop unless you can consolidate those parcels. So that's, I think, some of the question around for that future growth is certainly not, restricting a developer from doing what makes sense, but also providing guidance to them about what that future vision is for the corridor. And that's like, Hillary was saying, there is a sub-area plan that actually has looked at that. So can we implement some of those pieces through these place types?
John, did you have a question or something?
Oh, I think we were just discussing. I think part of the discussion is to, test our own thinking of where we're at, and what this is, and so forth. And so with that, I'd say our current comp plan does not have a land use map, correct?
Correct.
It's very general in nature.
Let's just, really, what it has in my mind, what I believe I use and we use are, let's call it chapters that talk about areas, Spokane River area, woodland area, hillside area, et cetera, et cetera. And in those areas, with words, not a map, it kind of paints a picture of what the future might be, right? Are we not trying to, instead of having words, we have, well, maybe we have words too, but we have kind of a graphical picture of where, you know, these, you know, areas might want to transition to someday. Is that
That's correct.
so, sort of correct? And so with that, I sit here and I look at all this, and I'm trying to fast forward 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years, you know, whatever, down the road. And where this comes into play, I'm thinking, asking myself is, we're sitting in this very room, and there's someone at that podium, and they're looking for a zone change or a special use permit or some planning action from us, and we have to make findings. That's where the rubber hits the road, is the findings. So we would look at, I guess, this land use map, would we not, and say, you know, B8B or whatever the finding number is this or is this not in conformance with the comp plan? And then we look at this land use map that we're developing right now, and we go, you know, yeah, I think we had this vision that, you know, mixed use would be appropriate out there on East Sherman or Apple Way or North Government Way or, you know, parts of North 4th Street or North Government Way or whatever I meant, you know, some of these other areas. Is that the tool that this becomes?
Yes, it absolutely, in conjunction with the place types. So you would look at the map, you'd look at the place types and say, is this consistent with the request? And you'd look at any of the goals and objectives in the comprehensive plan to be able to make your findings and decision on that.
And that all makes sense. I'm very, very comfortable. Where I sit in here and I'm starting to squirm a little bit, Alex, hello, is, you know, if we're tonight we're going parcel by parcel and trying to do stuff, you know, gosh, I hope everybody planned for a long night.
No, and I think, let me clarify. I think the question, to bring the questions back up, we're not looking for a parcel level kind of review of this. I think what we're looking for is really, like East Sherman, for example, you have a sub-area plan that that recommends, you know, potentially a different type of land use than what is currently there now, or bolstering that land use. And so what future guidance would this plan give, this map give, when those changes start to occur? And so you're exactly right from a finding standpoint. The future land use map is a way to, you know, talk about consistency with that future growth. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a way to help guide that. And so East Sherman was an example. You know, another example that we had been talking about internally, sorry, my map's a little slow here right now, is when you get up into the Apple Way area, for example. You know, Apple Way is really interesting when you look at just the sheer amount of commercial land here. We took this purple. Purple is essentially C17, C17L. We just applied that to kind of show what that is. So that's you know, kind of what's allowed there now. But when you look at some of these other areas like North Weidler and 95, there's large parcels here supported by a lot of residential development. Is that an area that, you know, maybe in the future might be a better mixed use type of development as opposed to large format retail? You know, or, you know, some of these other corners, you know, along government, where you have, let me make this a little more transparent so we can see what's underneath it. You know, if in that rendering that I showed, if some of this parking changes over time to something else, you know, having a mixed use place type on top of that helps you make findings to be able to support that type of development. And so that's where we're starting to talk about consistency with the scenarios, what the community input was for, you know, focusing development centrally so that there's more services adjacent to residential. And I know, Michael, you had a question about defining walkable. Communities define walkable in a lot of different ways. I think for how Coeur d'Alene residents and businesses have talked about it as being able to walk to get a cup of coffee or go to the grocery store. You know, they haven't, there's other ways you can define that, but those are some of the things that we've heard through the community process about having services closer by. So I think those are the broader brush questions that we're asking about, in general, how to think about mixed use versus commercial. That was one of the questions that we had tonight. Not necessarily get into that parcel level, change this to red instead of blue. Lynn, you had a question?
Well, what would really help me, because we always get stuck south of 90 and Sherman and the high profile areas, and I think we need to look at the city as a whole as what is blighted, what is deteriorated, what is vacant, what is underutilized. That would really help us on determining where we need to do multifamily, workforce housing, what should stay industrial, what should stay. But I'm having a hard time because I personally can identify some blighted areas. There's other areas that I don't really travel into, or underutilized is probably the best word for it. And where that will transition over time, and where and how we should direct it. And so I'd love to have a map where we're seeing things that are more like, gee, these are all, you know, mobile homes, and Howard Street is a particular one I go through all the time. And I see Howard, and I know that these will be gone, but are we helping them get to a better solution than just, we've got a bunch of little, you know, multifamily stuff sort of cropping up and it's cleaning up. But then we also have to address things like parklands. I mean, should these developing areas not have a park? To my mind, they should have a park. So I got to see that we have to have a broader spectrum on where are we really going to see change? And that's what I'm not seeing on these maps, is what is blighted, what is standing vacant, Shopco and so on. You know, I think that would help us better so we can see where that shift is going to occur. We know what's not going to occur. A lot of the residential is not going to change. So that would really help me.
Yeah, and I think that, again, residential, we're not proposing any changes in that. You know,
Right.
The single family neighborhood stays single family. We did do, and we showed it a few previous presentations, vacant as well as underutilized properties, and you know, looking at land to improvement values within the area. And from a redevelopment standpoint, you know, those are the parcels that stood up as, you know, where you would potentially see that growth over time. And so that's how we built the scenarios. You know, when you look at, for example, let me pull this down. When you look at like the compact scenario, for example, you know, there's a bunch of different colors on here, and you can see some of the purples through here that are maintained as, you know, those kind of retail spaces. But then these, the red spaces. But when you get to the purple, a lot of those purple areas are actually areas that are potentially, at least, you know, from a land to improvement value standpoint, potentially redevelopable over time. And so those are some of the things that we could, which is why we've been focusing on these corridors, because that's where most of those properties have come up.
Okay.
This is a mess of a map, so it's hard to read, but I
sure
just wanted to
is.
show that.
Yeah.
So if I could ask the question, this is kind of to you, Sean, I think, is, maybe I missed something, but I thought kind of if there was a decision point tonight, if you will, and, you know, one, we've talked before about, you know, a district versus compact. Have we made that decision? Or have we made that recommendation? Or have we reconciled the benefits of one over the other? Is that one decision point tonight?
So on the December 8th meeting, the feedback that we received was, hey, let's have the higher of the density, which was the compact. But it sounded like, well, there's some value to be had from like the district portion. And we heard, well, the south of I-90, does some of the district make sense? And so the feedback that we received was, hey, well, maybe somewhat of a hybrid version of that would work. And so that's what we're like fleshing out tonight is, okay, well, let's take a look at where some districts may be, or the corridors, what that flavor will be. So I might have misspoke by saying, hey, where are we going to put the employment center? But ultimately, if we're going to meet the density that we're hoping to meet in build out of the city, which is even beyond 20 years, is looking at, okay, well, where is the transportation working? Where can we see that mixed use going along these corridors? Is it make more sense to be like a mixed use or a retail, and so we're looking for some of that feedback. But we've also have some, like the East Sherman Corridor project, is we've reached out to the locals and the stakeholders, and we've gotten some of that feedback already. So, yeah, looking for feedback. How deep do we want to go into those neighborhoods with redevelopment over the next 20 years? If you take a look at East Sherman, some of the feedback we got was one block either way would be good to have some higher density residential development. And is that acceptable? Does it suffice? Is it going to meet our growth needs to have housing available for people and affordable, and those types of questions?
With that, if I may, so it wouldn't really be high density. I don't want to, concern the public who's listening. Along East Sherman is more just like more of that urban, so maybe townhouses or things that kind of fit. So, maybe it's a couple stories. It's not like 63 feet tall. It's not the R34s that we would expect, but I think a little bit more urban form to kind of complement mixed use opportunities along that corridor. And I think, I can understand some reluctance and concern because this is new. But looking at the different place types and the land use designations, so mixed use doesn't mean you have to always do everything has to be stacked and it has to be, residential with commercial. It allows more opportunity than retail corridor is just strip commercial. It's not expecting residential. So I think those are things to kind of think through, and we're finding this as we go too. This is just colors on a map right now. We're even tweaking some of the names to say, okay, should there be like an area that's a full mixed-use district versus, maybe if there's smaller lots, kind of like East Sherman, should they have different names, just to allow transition of uses over time?
Kind of a continuation of what has been started with some of the townhouses, and as well as what's been on Coeur d'Alene Lake Drive, which is not a high-density, high-rise, but 2-story, 3-story with some commercial use that's already been built and rented out. That theme perhaps going down the corridor of Sherman instead of, I remember years ago, because it's all C-17, and we went through, hearings or a lot of discussions. Yeah, with C-17, we can go up as high as we want. And, maybe that's not, I don't think that would ever work down on Sherman because of the neighborhoods right next to that corridor down there. So I think it's kind of a scaled down version theme of, all right, how does that flow all the way to the freeway, all the way down to Coeur d'Alene Lake Drive? And over the years, I think we've seen, more townhouses, different designs, and that, they're building right now some more down there for more townhouses. We haven't seen a lot of commercial with residential above it yet, because that takes a certain degree of commitment from a developer to do that.
And I think, Commissioner, that's a great kind of comment in terms of scale. Like when we look at, East Sherman, again, smaller parcels, adjacent to neighborhoods. When you get into these central spaces, though, where there is more development, and I think this was why you and City Council gravitated to this more, is that there's higher intensity development already occurring within these areas. And so like some of these larger parcels that could transition over time are those areas that you'd want to see, more scale and different types of uses as opposed to just kind of typical C-17. And I think, that's true down here with Kootenai Health as well, with, the health district and others. And so I think that's at least in general terms, I think from a good outcome from tonight would be to understand, are there areas, if we've agreed to the compact/district, are there areas that we should be focusing on for more mixed use as opposed to commercial. And then we as a team can go back and work on the maps and come back to you with something more refined. Like, are there specific areas we should really consider for, specific types of place type to help move this map forward?
Chair, one quick question. So on the map there that you had, south of Sherman, there's 2 blocks that are different color from down to Mullen. Is that a change in what's currently exists?
That is an area where we've talked about internally that this still needs to be refined, because that probably goes too far into the neighborhood that's not entirely consistent yet with kind of the revitalization plan for East Sherman. So, but these are all things that we're looking at just to say, okay, how does this reflect with current zoning, with any plans that might already be in place or in the works?
There's more discussion to follow on that in the committee.
Correct.
I understand, Mr. Ingles, what you're saying about a map, and you're right, a map would be more specific. But I'm not so sure that we're in an area to be that specific. I think that, as you talked before, we have verbal descriptions of this area, that area, so how they flow together, and let the private sector come up and make their proposals on how they're going to fill that. And then when we have our findings, it's based on our, sort of like it is now, on a sector and so forth, as opposed to a rigid map. Because if we get a map, it'd be more specific, but it'll also take, I think we would want to spend an awful lot of time on that map to make sure it was good for 20 or 30 years.
Well, and Hillary, maybe you could.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Alex,
You
I
could
can.
speak to that a
So
little bit.
when we scoped this project, we specifically said we wanted a future land use map, and that is a requirement of the state for the Local Land Use Planning Act. So we wanted to have more specificity. One thing we will do, though, is we're trying to figure out how do we blur the lines so it's not so specifically at the parcel level. And there might be some areas where instead of coloring, a parcel a specific color, we might show a little dashed circle that shows kind of an activity area or something. So there's a lot of work to do on this, and I can, again, we understand why it's concerning
I would
to change
encourage
the
us
colors.
to be general in fashion. And the other is, explain to me density. Why do we want to increase the density? Is that our goal? I sort of understand it, but when we're talking about it now, I need to have help on why we want to increase the density.
It's not necessarily we're trying to increase density, we're trying to accommodate population growth that's anticipated and is obviously already coming into our area. So how do we respond to that? And so we're looking at our community, our existing city limits boundaries, to say where can we accommodate growth, and then also looking at our ACI, so the areas outside of the city limits where we can grow, and trying to figure out, are there those vacant and underutilized properties? Where are there other places where we could add some additional units without negatively impacting existing neighborhoods? And so core housing is one of those examples where we're trying to look at, is there a way through the zoning code we can allow some additional housing product types in the right areas at the right house scale and allow for some growth without changing the full character of areas? And so we're not, and then there's other areas where we should look at, okay, should this be an area for a large apartment complex? Because this is maybe perfect, it's right near, the interstate and it's walkable to services. So those are the areas where we're trying to get input from the commission and then the council ultimately.
So if we set I don't know if goal's the right word, but I'll use that for lack of a goal of what the total population of the city shall be in 20 years or whatever, however many time we have. Okay.
The KMPO, and Sean might want to speak to that, but they do the growth projections for the whole region. And so we are expected to be at 85,000 by the year 2040. Now, we
And
might need
want
to get there
And the
before
community
that.
wants to accept 85,000. So we don't have to.
Well, that's been anticipated for a long time, even through our wastewater master planning process, so.
Just so somewhere that our elected officials, the council has determined in some fashion, or will determine, what a appropriate population size is for our community. And that's not going to be easy, but.
That's correct, yes. So we've done that in the past through master plans, and so that's kind of been the number. We certainly, through land use decisions, you can change that as well, by allowing growth and a little bit more intensity in certain areas, so that's one thing. But, it's tricky, so Sean talked about it, so we don't know ultimate build-out, so there's always going to be some change, but also through the future land use map and the comp plan, and then ultimately zoning too, that allows how, it basically guides how the community will grow. So like Seattle is very different than Coeur d'Alene in terms of the height and the intensity of building. So a lot of that's done through a comprehensive plan and then a zoning code to say what's appropriate scale for Coeur d'Alene.
And I expect if you talk to them, they're looking back, they said, we should have done this instead of that. And so this is our opportunity to do this instead. Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll be interested in the core housing, because that would be, maybe part of my conversation will come when we talk about that.
Okay.
But anyway, I propose, a map, it'd be easier if we had a general coloring as opposed to block and street and whatnot, in my opinion.
So to speak to that, on our current map, and you guys are very familiar with it, you've been listening to this since 2008, for those of you who've been around for a while, is we have stable, established, transition, and urban reserve. And those are the three categories we have. And it doesn't speak to use, it doesn't speak to, I mean, on those pages, it talks about each one of the districts may reach a certain number of units per acre, but it doesn't talk down to parcel size. It doesn't talk about the transportation network or how those things will come together. And so we felt that was way too broad. And so we needed more specificity. That was the direction that we got from council is, hey, help us make these decisions in the future on how to grow. And so we got to find that quote unquote sweet spot of where the map provides us the information that we need to make decisions over the next 20 years, but not so much to where it's like, well, this specific parcel is going to be this specific use. And that's what those place types talk about. So mixed use doesn't define, it has to be a McDonald's or it has to be whatever a specific business is. It allows for a range of businesses, and it allows for different uses above, such as office or retail or whatever, homes or rentals or what have you.
Have we looked at communities that we feel very comfortable with, that have been successful, and how they've got their success? Others have gone through this before. I don't know, Seattle's not a good example, but there's other areas that have jurisdictions that have gone through this, and very successfully, I assume. Have you had an opportunity to look at those and see what we can essentially garner from them? Okay.
We have through the process, especially when we were doing the initial scoping and kind of looking at that, as well as, Alex and MIG, that they bring that to the table.
So we can say, and as has Park City, Utah has done, or as somebody else has done, this in our same category, this is what they've done, and they were very successful. I remember 8-10 years ago, we were talking about, I think it was Bozeman, different, and they were very successful in certain things. I think we try to copy a couple of those. Okay. Thank you.
Also, so Commissioner Fleming has had her hand up, so
I
just want to make
apologize.
sure. It's tricky with the Zoom screen. You can't really see if the Zooming commissioners are trying to talk.
Quick question, could we focus, something that really gets a lot of pushback around here is high-rise? Is there any way we can kind of narrow down where we're willing to see high-rises? Because I know there's huge pushback downtown on anything, 60 feet and up. We get that big push. Is there a place that makes more sense? I mean, to me, around the highways make a lot of sense. We are going to see them on Celtice. That might be a category we can kind of nail it down and kind of eliminate the fright from everyone else, is where can we put tall buildings that aren't going to, bend people out of shape.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about place types is that helps you be able to show that. And so I think like this, for example, this is downtown, which is red here. This is the downtown place type, which has the taller buildings in it. I guess when you step back, there's two pieces. One is that we were talking about this PUD place type, which potentially could be used for existing PUDs that have those towers, like, or that may in the future have those towers. But for the place type, yeah, you could certainly say, that this area in the future would see additional height. And so or not. It could be that this area does not see additional height because of adjacencies, adjacent neighborhoods or, parks or whatever that may be. But the place type can help provide that guidance for what that
Yeah, because I think you're going to have a narrow target for that. It'll narrow it down. Because I think a lot of the residential folks on the fringes are very concerned when they think, oh my goodness, the whole of Sherman could have a high-rise building along that stretch and we don't want it. And so I would love to get past that and not worry. Sherman seems to drive this ship. But maybe it's north of 90 near the now somewhat abandoned retail outlets, or it's a cross street that is adjacent to those shopping opportunities, that maybe we can see things going vertically instead of just all sort of spotty retail or, RV parks. And there's a lot of opportunity up on Government Way. There's also a lot on Howard. There's opportunities that could go taller. Because the walkability could be improved by having some height and some open green spaces in between.
And that's exactly what we're trying to get to with these place types. Like, for example, the mixed use district is 2 to 3 stories. So that's, that maybe East Sherman, maybe that's a good scale for that, because there's a lot of single family neighborhoods adjacent. But like, a mixed use activity center or, something that could be envisioned to be 5 or 6 stories. And so I think that's part of what this map can do, is be able to provide that guidance for, one, what did the community tell us from where they want to see growth happening, to where are those opportunity sites based on, the vacant redevelopable lands that we were looking at. And, and 3, then what are the services and uses that should be mixed together in those areas? And I think that's where the place types can be able to provide some of that guidance for when you make land use decisions in the future for, zoning or development or whatever that might be. And that, so that's one reason why we were actually focusing in this area here, is because this is kind of the center of a lot of that discussion. Is, there's naturally occurring affordable housing in this area, which with manufactured homes and others provides a needed affordable housing. But surrounding that are some newer but a lot of older retail commercial that maybe in the future could serve a higher use.
Right. Okay.
Are we on a schedule, or, this is great that we have discussion, but Alex, if you want to keep doing your presentation, go ahead. I guess if there's other questions, that's great, but I'm sure we have a certain amount of time that we're trying to get done what we're trying to do here.
Well, so maybe, and Sean and Hillary, I'll defer to you. I think for this, maybe what I'm hearing is we maybe need to come back with a more finished map to be able to talk through some of these pieces. So we could focus on some of the other questions about what those place types look like the additional ones for historic or planned unit development. Does that make sense? Because we can continue to talk about this, but I think we're getting a little stuck in some of these pieces, and maybe if we came back with something that was more refined, that would be an easier, the better conversation to have. And so Hillary and Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that works. If there are any specific areas, though, that you do think we could add the higher density residential or the taller height, things like that, any guidance you can provide for us tonight, that's helpful. That just makes it easier for us as we do start to refine the map. Or if there's areas where you say, okay, scale this back. So another area, the health corridor area, we wanted to dial that in and look at that in relation to the master plan and allow for some mixed use, but again, preserving the single-family residential neighborhoods to the south. So there's a couple areas we already know we're going to deal with. Same with Atlas, since that's PUD and a mixed-use kind of activity center. But if there are areas where you think someone comes forward with R34, where would you think that'd be a great location? That would be helpful for us.
I'll jump in there. I think some of those, Alex and Hillary and Sean and others, I think there is a difference. And if I'm looking at this map and the colors, purple or whatever I'm seeing here, I'm seeing that on East Sherman, and I want that to be 2-3 story kind of a variety of mixed use and whatnot. But let's jump out the 95 corridor or North Government Way or whatnot, and there's old, kind of tired out strip malls and
A lot of vacant, not vacant land, but just
underutilized and
underutilized, not being used anymore properties out that way.
tacky under, whatever. I'll pick on one property. No offense out there if I'm picking on your property, but, that, just as an example, at 95 and Kathleen.
95 and Kathleen, right where
Yeah,
the
there's
old lumber used to
an
be.
old lumber store, okay. And there's other places like that. We could pick on another one. And before that Home Mart came to being, after Kmart left, I thought, geez, I kind of, no offense to At Home, but I kind of thought maybe old Kmart, you bulldoze that down, and it wants to be like you described, the 5-story, the higher density one. That's certainly different than East Sherman, and so I don't think, I think I could do my version of that, and you could, each commissioner could sort of kind of play that role and kind of go almost parcel by parcel, area by area. Certainly, the more you go out north, you're on a busier corridor, you're further removed from more sensitive, my backyard. It goes up and it becomes maybe a little bit more tolerable for something a little bit bigger and whatnot. I don't know that we can do that as a committee. It's hard to, give me the map and I'll take it home and do it as homework maybe, and I could scratch something out, but.
No, but we can come back to you with a map that accounts for that. And I think that's, what I'm hearing is that, Government Way and the 95 corridor, that's where, from a redevelopable standpoint and your commercial core, that's where all of that is, or a lot of that is. And so what we could do is look at intersections, like major intersections, and see kind of, are there specific areas, like Kathleen and Government Way is actually a really interesting one, because these are larger parcels. There's a lot of commercial here, some in better shape than others, so that we can look for those opportunities to think about where that higher scale of growth might occur, as opposed to East Sherman, which is more kind of locally serving.
I agree, and I could sit here and rattle off. In my mind, I think East Sherman has got to be a little bit more sensitive. 4th Street, there might be opportunities there somewhere.
Next level of sensitivity than all the way out north. As we get away from the city and we go up north.
To me, parts of 4th Street north of
certain
Harrison
areas.
might have some opportunities, but maybe they need to be more of the East Sherman variety than the, say, out there by 95 and maybe some of the government ways and that sort of thing.
Okay?
That's great input. Yeah, so we can get, and again, this map is a working map, so we can get into this and we can start to make these changes to come back to you with, that's something that's more refined. But we can look at those intersections and kind of location that I think is good direction to help us with this. So.
Fleming had her hand up again.
Go ahead. Yeah, I
Commissioner
can't
Fleming.
see your hand, so you just got to jump in
Commissioner
here.
Fleming.
And also, can we look at what remains more transportation driven versus walking on foot? Because I look at Apple Way from Government heading west, and that to me is always about cars, because it's not very nice to walk there at all. But Best Avenue could be a nice work, live, play stretch from 4th over to 15th. That could be another good opportunity to get a little more density, but still make it's a decent walkable area. There's even some parks nearby. That's another area that could become that mixed use, 3-story, 2-story, a little bit of Sherman Avenue north of 90.
Good point.
Yeah, I always look at the underserved, not the overserved. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And we got a lot of underserved areas here. So, yeah, we got a lot of big map that doesn't have a lot of parks nor walkability. And if it's car driven, then yeah, off of 90, off of 95, I could see a cluster of high-rise and low-rise shop kind of service-oriented things in that Kathleen area, and even down in that old home, whatever it's whatever that store is called, never been in it. Yes, high-rises would be great there because you would get a view. You could get up and actually get away from the traffic and get some views. So,
Thanks, Lynn.
yep.
So there was a comment from Commissioner Borazan, just so we can put this out so everybody has it.
Alex, that's not a commissioner, that's a member of the public that's attending.
Oh, it's Merkel. Oh, okay, sorry, thank you. So I think there was just a question about population for that. So I think we've addressed that through some of the other, the growth targets that you had talked about, Hillary. Let's see, are there other, this is good. So this helps us frame some of these questions about mixed use versus, scale of mixed use and future development. Are there other questions? Are there areas that you'd want to look at that we could zoom into and we could talk about briefly?
Sean, were there other areas that you wanted a little more guidance from the commissioners this evening?
Yeah, so I did make a list prior to this, and pretty much all of them have been brought up, but we haven't dove in real deeply. So Ingalls brought up the Government Way, kind of Midtown area, and then moving north to where Government Way US 95 is at. There's quite a change in, the smaller boutique, tinier lot sizes, individual ownerships, where you start moving north and you end up with, more of the quarter acre style lots. I think of like the Oddfellows buildings that's for sale right now. That's probably lived its life and should become something else. But there is that transition right around Harrison where things do change. And so that's probably one of the areas that we could use a little help and direction on.
Yeah, I would have to agree with, what John says about not looking at so much districts, but, there might be some dividing lines. Sherman's a little more sensitive as you get further up 4th Street. Sean, like you just said, it might change again to the next level of development. And then as you get past Harrison and past 95, it's completely different development type of opportunity or more vacant land.
Right. One of the areas I really see that wants to change quite a bit right now, and we've seen a push over the years, is south of Ironwood and north of Harrison on Government Way. And over the years, there's been some zone changes that were approved. I believe there's been some that have been denied because there are homes in that area, a lot of homes, and they almost make it all the way to Government Way, and there's a few on Government Way. And so, where is that sensitive line, or how can we do this to where we're being sensitive to the neighborhood, but also allowing for growth?
And plus, in certain areas like that, I've seen when I drive around town a lot, there's a couple of houses here going up, a couple of houses, a duplex here going up, and it doesn't come before us. It's by right. So there's little pockets that we haven't seen anything come before us, and there are little neighborhoods that are just popped up. But right next to it, there's a lot of vacant land. So I think what you're saying is kind of the right direction, what John and Lynn has said as well.
Yeah, I had one more thought, and when I was looking at areas on my own a little bit, I'll throw this out as Alex, you and Sean, you look at maps and whatnot. And I know single family needs to be off the table in these big neighborhoods and whatnot, but some places in town, I believe we have houses that sit on commercial lots. So would they be in fair play for, the comp plan of the future to say, hey, that may be a place to take a hard look? Let me give you an example of what I'm throwing out there. And in this case, I'm kind of drawing a box rather than an intersection or a street. But if you took kind of from Ironwood, and Ironwood sort of wants to become Annie, bear with me, over to 4th. So I'm going to draw a box for you. It's going to be Government Way to 3rd, from Ironwood down to hazelish, walnut-ish. I don't know, I'm not trying to be real specific, but in there, you're familiar with it. You got the bus barn, is the old city, or the school bus barn. You got Daft Badger, which is kind of an odd, kind of a place. But it's such a hodgepodge of little things in there. It just seems like that's a box of stuff that's ripe, screaming to be something different.
Yeah,
Shame
and I
on
think-
me for throwing that
No,
one
it's kind of
out
an
there.
interesting concept too, because like you mentioned, I mean, it is a mix of things. So we do have Daft Badger, which is allowed in the neighborhood. They have limited hours, because I think, is it neighborhood commercial zoning? But there are some offices right around there, and then there's, the bus storage. So, I mean, and they've called themselves kind of, I think the No-Ha area is kind of the north of Harrison, so I don't know what the boundaries are of that, but is that its own little district? And should there be some consideration of some transition of uses, or to preserve, or to allow for some change to happen in that area?
What few houses are in some of those boxes, that may not be the precise box, but I'm describing a flavor here, and maybe there's another one in town that there might be one kind of north of town. There used to be kind of some weird places out there by, it'll come to me. Oh, out by the Cenex, south of there's a little brew pub. Help me.
Oh, on Government Way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there's one or two houses tucked in some places. So, and they're probably not really zoned. It's not a neighborhood per se. There's some areas in this box I'm trying to paint a picture of that aren't really high-functioning neighborhoods, that's for sure.
Yeah, but you have 20 years, as I was just mentioning, you're having neighborhoods actually being developed that you just don't see unless you're driving around, because there might be someone that, by right can build 3 or 4 homes, and, by right they can do that, or a couple of duplexes. So I'm seeing little neighborhoods developed in pieces of property that people own that are in this area, right next to pieces of property that have been vacant and maybe ripe for redevelopment. But again, I think you're having small little neighborhoods come up in our town that are aren't in front of us all the time unless you're driving around town and seeing it. So I think, it's just saying, John, how much you want staff to say, all right, here's a circle, and maybe redevelopment might overlap in that circle, or how defined you're gonna get. But I don't know if everyone's saying the same thing, that I think you have to look at little different sections. As we said,
And-
Sherman is one area, north of the freeway is another area, east of the freeway is another area.
And I think I'm seeing some purple in that area I'm describing, the Daft Badger area. And again, to your point you've made a few times, I would think that would be maybe a East Sherman-ish level of intensity versus,
Full high-rise or full
yeah,
commercial.
out North Government Way, North 95.
So I think there's a couple kind of, things to consider for this. So the place types, aren't changing the underlying zoning. So uses allowed by right would continue to be allowed by right underneath that. So you allow single-family residential within your commercial zoning now. So those could, continue to develop in that area unless you change your zoning, which we're not proposing. But I think the component with the place type is when, and this is when you as Planning Commission, City Council would see it, as if there are zone changes proposed. And so that is where a place type really helps kind of you make decisions about, if somebody is going to change a use, what guidance do you have to be able to make a decision. And so that's why the land use map is useful for that. But for like the day-to-day development application for a single family home, the place type is not going to change that unless there was underlying zone changes. And that's something that would be, further down the road if that's something that the city were to do. But that's not part of this project, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Go right ahead, Peter.
this is a site. Could you blow up that picture a little bit better where you, up Government Way, where he shows all a little bit less, where you show Coeur d'Alene Place, et cetera?
That better?
Yeah, then,
I think it might be
if you
in the middle there.
look there, you can see, I think I've been on planning, well, how long's Coeur d'Alene Place been in place? 20 years? 15 years? So
Yeah.
if you look at that and how it's moving up that way up the prairie, that is much visually different than it is to the right.
Okay.
It's just an observation. So where we're going, I think, sometime may be more to what's to the left than what is to the right. And is that what we want to do? Or do we even have any say about that? And I have take no position on it, but it's just very visually, we have two different communities here. One to the left of Government Way, to the west, and one to the east. And that is because that's where the most recent growth has been, is in the prairie, where it was not developed at all. It's just, from visually, it's two different communities. Not saying one's bad and one's good, it's just different.
Okay.
So any other comments on the map? This is really helpful. I think we can help refine. We can refine this map pretty well with this input. So I appreciate that. Any other comments on this map? We have some time left. We could probably talk about some of the other kind of place type, either revisions or changes. I think based on some of this conversation today or this evening would help with that. But for the map. Are we doing okay? We have some revisions, but are we doing kind of moving in the right direction, it sounds like, with some changes here and there?
I think you're doing a fine job, Alex. This
Thank you,
commission
Commissioner
report.
Rumpler. Appreciate it. It's always tough to create from scratch, so that's why we wanted to check in. So. All right, well with that, let me turn this off. And again, there'll be more opportunity to discuss this. So a couple other pieces that we were looking at. So we talked about the direction of the land use map. We talked a lot about mixed use and some of the commercial areas. So we'll update the map and get that back to you for review. There is a couple pieces that we were thinking about, as we were developing this map and updating it, are really, focus on the place types themselves. And there was some conversation tonight about, from a scale standpoint, should there be a higher density place type, whether it's residential or mixed use or some sort like that, that's maybe different than downtown, that might be applied in some locations. That's one question that I heard. And then two that we had were, there are, potentially future historic districts coming in for neighborhoods. And we were thinking about how to treat that, whether that should be its own place type, or it could be an overlay that could be used a little bit more generally throughout the city for historic areas. And then the third piece on the place types are, you have a number of planned unit developments that have, as Sean said, kind of their own specific boxes that they're already working in. And should we add a place type that acknowledges that, instead of trying to break out each use within that place type, within that PUD by place type? And so those are the three questions I think came up. I heard one new one and then the two that we were thinking about. Are there others that we should talk about specifically about place types? Or we can just get through those three.
No?
It sounds like the place types make sense. Is that a fair assumption?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes, that works for me.
good.
Alex, one thing that might help too, I don't know, so it sounded like there was maybe a little confusion or concern with the employment center place type, and I don't know if that one would be worth explaining more, or if that also could be scalable like the mixed use one we talked about.
Sure, so let's bring this up. So employment center, a lot of these, and I think as these are refined, the zoning, the underlying zoning we might refine which zoning goes in each one. But the employment center is generally, it's a little more higher scale, likely more auto-oriented. And so there's a couple different images here that shows, what employment centers might be. It could be a call center. It could be an office building. It could be, a number of different types of uses, but it's really focused on employment without residential. And so that's the differentiation between more mixed use as opposed to pure employment. So an employment center, we've been talking about it. It could be a hospital, it could be, as I said, a big office building, in a certain area. That's kind of the definition of how we were thinking about employment centers. Hillary or Sean, did you have any additional thoughts on that, or?
I was going to say, no, I agree with that. One of the things that our current code implies is that hospitals are civic. And so I guess for my personal review of this thing and assigning what we see in 20 years, I just want to be sure that I'm assigning it correctly. So if you look at what the hospital is now, I put it as civic, but if it should be employment center, then by all means, let's figure that out.
And I think that probably would be a good one to do as an employment center, just kind of looking at all the potential growth in that area. But the interesting thing, how we have the place type now, is that you can even have neighborhood commercial for an employment center. So you could have a smaller, like we talked about, if there was a location on East Sherman or some other spot on Government Way where it's like, that could be a great location for a small, concentrated, some businesses to cluster together without it being a Schreiber Way. It's not like an entire industrial area.
Other questions on employment center or any of these, actually? All right, so let's talk about some of the others. So I'm going to add in here typing in front of an audience. It's always stuff. So there was a question about taller buildings and mixed use, and if we do have a couple, scales of mixed use. One is 2 to 3 stories, and one is up to about 5. Should we look at a taller mixed use, or a taller kind of residential type as a place type? Commissioner Fleming, I know you were talking a fair bit about that, so maybe turn that to you first.
Yeah, I'm envisioning, since we're talking about 85,000 populace and only a certain amount of land, developable land, that I think you're going to be pushing to try to achieve or house that much in the land we have, and 2-story, 3-story, barely even 5-story. I think you're going to have some opportunity for some high-rise clustering. And that means more open space, more parks, more, community grouping of high rises to create a cluster. I think last time I was at a meeting in one of the affordable housing people who build in this area, connoted something called Oak Ridge Center in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm from. It was a massive parking lot and a massive 1-story shopping mall. And now they're putting in almost, I think there's 12 or 14 towers, but that's in a city that's growing hand and foot so fast they can't keep ahead of it. But I do think that you could cluster housing and make a very livable, almost a destination point for high-rise housing, because as we age, we get in elevators, we're comfortable going up. We don't have to walk up 3 flights, you can get in an elevator and be home. And I think that is the way you're going to accommodate 85,000 occupants in this small footprint that we call Coeur d'Alene. So that's just my thought. I think there are places for it. I see it, there are places where it could be worked through. It's just, we have to sort of say, are we ready to embrace that? I think in 20 years, we might very well be, so.
Other comments about that scale?
Yeah, I would just, this is Commissioner Rumpler, I would just echo what Commissioner Fleming just said. I think a judicious use of the ability to use height to enable and accommodate growth that, as she just pointed out, at Vancouver, they have no other option but to go to height.
Yeah.
Not to say that we don't have any other options, but again, the judicious application of height should be in our armamentarium as we look at land use.
Well, and maybe those are things that are grouped with like employment center or others, that if you have high employment areas, do you look at different types of housing adjacent?
Even mass transit, if we're looking at some sort of bus system or way to move people without moving cars. That's why it's working there, because you're right on the metro line and you're downtown in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pay for parking, that it's ridiculous. So we're almost at the point where we can, at 85,000, we don't have enough dirt on the ground and asphalt and parking spots to accommodate people getting their car and going somewhere. They have to get in a bus, or they have to transit by bicycle or some other methodology in order to handle that kind of numbers on the roadways that we currently have.
Other comments about potentially adding this place type, and we can certainly work this up and see
I have
what
a
this
comment.
looks like. Yep.
What's the purpose of adding taller buildings? I don't understand remind me
Capacity.
again why we want to put taller buildings.
Capacity. We need to fit in a lot more. We need to double our populace in the current land masses that we have. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to go vertically. Or you end up covering all the land with 2 and 3 and 5-story buildings. And you'll never accommodate the demand that's out there and that we have obviously seen, at huge numbers lately. So yeah, going vertical allows you to fit in the populace that is wanting to live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
I think the other argument would be, I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying the other argument would be, affordability. And, we see the articles in the paper, I think just this week or maybe last, about the average home price in Coeur d'Alene's gone up to $500,000, and there's almost no inventory, there's just nothing to sell, but people want to live here, they want to move here. You have children, you want them to be able to stay here and have some place to live, be it a rental or a condo or whatever. And I guess the argument would be, some of these, if they're well-placed, taller buildings, high-rises or mid-rises or whatever, it's densification, but it provides housing stock and choices, missing middle, affordable housing,
So this is taller than we currently is currently authorized?
I don't know that we've defined it, that just says taller buildings. I don't know if that's.
When I say taller, the first thing that comes to my mind, taller than than is what currently is allowed under our building codes.
No, I was going to ask for some clarification on that too. So the R34 special use permit allows 63 feet in height, and then downtown we have about 220. I think it's about the maximum height if you get all the bonuses and can achieve that. But then we have C17, unlimited height, if it's 51% or more commercial. But is there some sweet spot you're looking at, right? So if you're trying to help guide the future, are you saying 85 feet, or is it, the 63 feet is kind of your taller than the 45 feet? What would the commission be comfortable looking at for that?
So is there a word we can use other than taller?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
No, I'm serious, taller, that gets all kinds of, exercises and maybe we let this sit for a couple of years and see what happens at River's Edge. What are they, of course, now that's there, I think, 4 stories.
45 feet.
Wherever it's above which they're not going higher, so high they need elevators. The constraining
Like the
limit
chicken,
there
it'll
is
drive
the
it.
elevator requirement. But anyway, the taller, I don't think we're saying that. I think we're saying something more finesse than taller.
Well, so maybe we can look at the place type and see if we can have better definition. Hillary, as you said, there's zoning already that allows, a fair bit of scale. I didn't use height, a fair bit of scale to the buildings. Maybe we can look at those place types to see if we need to add one, or if one needs to be modified to be able to accommodate something like that.
Yeah, and also through the comprehensive plan, it's general in nature, and so I would like to see a range rather than a specific height, because we're talking more of an ordinance at that point, where you say R17 shall be no taller than 45 feet. And so through a comp plan, we would say, okay, that's like Alex was alluding to, 2 to 3 stories, 5 to 6 stories. And some of that comes down to, building materials in and of themselves. So through the building code, you're allowed to build a stick-built building up to 5 or 6 stories before you go into like steel construction. Well, once you hit steel construction, you're not going to build 6 stories. To make that thing pencil, it's going to need to be at least 10 or 12 because of the cost. And I know lumber's really high right now, but during normal times when lumber isn't quite so high, it makes more sense to build out of wood and build at a lower scale. And so there is a gap there once the building materials change where scale becomes much bigger.
But if we go with some definition of tall or whatever that might be, can we do that and say, put a height number or whatever that is and not affect the legal right of a zone that it's currently existing in an area?
Well, so the comprehensive plan is a tool for us to
Right.
guide the development, but it also allows us to change the zoning code after the comprehensive plan is updated. So if we need to tweak zoning districts or clarify or add new zoning districts, we can do that. But it would be a guide to kind of help us do that so that we could say, well, maybe not everything is C17, maybe we have certain areas that's mixed commercial or whatever it would be, so it defines it a little bit more specifically.
All right, so, but if we go that route and we develop our comp plan and then say, all right, now we say in this area, it's going to be, our plan is no higher than 35 feet, 45 feet, whatever that magic number is. Now we have to go and change that zoning in there after that. How is that going to work? That's a long-term process, I would imagine, to do. And then, the people who own that piece of property might go, wait a minute, are you taking my rights away from me? So I'm not saying this isn't maybe the right direction to go or the wrong direction to go. I'm just looking at, okay, if that's some sort of recommendation that comes out of this meeting today to put some magic number on something, all right, what's the future steps of doing that? And how is that really going to be implemented when we get a comp plan that says something like that? That's my question.
Yeah, I think
My sense is we have some of that right here.
Right.
And it's sort of already defined, and we want it to be somewhat flexible. We don't want to tie it down to 63 and a half feet or whatever. It's, and maybe, I'd just like to see some of these sort of mixed-use areas that we're talking about almost be categorized. You got the 4 and the 4A, kind of, maybe you got 4B, I don't know, kind of deal where it's, 2 to 3 stories, and then it's 3 to 5 stories, and maybe there's a 4B, I don't know, but, rather than tie it down.
Would you say instead of taller buildings, scalable buildings, is scaled to something?
Well, we use
That's
the
what I heard
term
you
here,
say.
mixed-use district, and then we have mixed-use activity center. Maybe taller buildings is the higher intensity mixed-use activity center. I don't know.
So
I'm just saying, describe it with words and maybe a range of stories. I don't know.
No, I think it's a good point. One thing to remember is that, and Hillary mentioned this, is that your zoning is what is the regulatory decider, if you will, for what is allowed, the scale of that development. The place type is to provide guidance for that, but it's not. The zoning is what is going to dictate that allowed use, as well as the scale and kind of intensity of that use. The place type is to provide general guidance for future development, future zone changes, those types of things that would occur. And so what I'm hearing is that, maintain that flexibility with the heights within the place types. The zoning is where we can still, that would still be where you'd be working on those pieces, but, don't get so specific within the place type that nails, that nails it down too hard. And I think that's consistent with what we've been thinking about that as well. But what we can do is look at the place types again to make sure that it's in line with those allowed underlying uses of the zoning. And I think they're pretty close, but I think we want to look at the scale just to make sure. Just a couple other questions. We have a few minutes left. I wanted to talk briefly about historic districts. And so, that's been something that the community's been talking a lot about. You have, I believe, historic ordinance, draft version or even adopted now. The question for this from a place type standpoint is, how do we consider that within the comprehensive plan? Is it its own place type? That would be some type of historic place type. Or is it something that we could consider as an overlay where you could apply it where the base zoning is still there, the place type is still there, but you would have an added level of kind of historic overlay that would require additional analysis if something were to occur. So I think that's the question is, thoughts on how that might, when you're reviewing documents or reviewing applications, how you'd like to see that be used? Or do we even need it?
Alex, I'll throw a thought out there, and it's kind of like where I was going with my thinking earlier. I said, let's fast forward to the future, a couple of years from now, when we're using this comp plan, and we're sitting here deciding on a matter, whatever it might be, a variance, a special use permit, whatever it might be. And so we're using this comp plan as a tool to make a decision called findings, and we're making findings. And where maybe we lack now and that maybe we should have in the future, if we had an overlay that designated historical areas, would there be a different level of, say, caution that we as a body would consider one of these planning actions before us if it was in one of those overlay areas? We have finding B8Z that, this is a historical area, so therefore you're going to use extra caution or something like that. Is that as the comp plan as a tool, is that where we might want to craft this comp plan to better protect those areas?
And
I
let
think
me add to
Hillary
that, Alex,
Sure.
regarding historic districts, and Hillary, how does a historic district come about? It might be great that we might have a conversation saying, all right, this area should be, or this area shouldn't be. How does that come about before it gets even into a comp plan or is designated in a certain area? What's the process of becoming a historic district?
Time-consuming and kind of complicated. So we have, currently, the Fort Grounds neighborhood has that designation, and the Garden District is in the process of doing that. So you have to do a detailed survey of all of the properties within the district and determine, are the properties historic in nature? Are they contributing to be, if someone wanted to put it on the register of historic places, does it qualify, things like that. So that's that process they have to go through, working with our State Historic Preservation Office. And now that we have a new commission, that process will come through the city's commission. Then they basically go through the process to apply to become recognized through the National Register of Historic Places as a district. Then what we've talked about through the Historic Preservation Plan that's being drafted concurrently with the comp plan, that would get rolled in. So that Historic Preservation Plan would be a component of this. So we're trying to look at, then, are there recommendations through that and the comp plan to change our zoning code to allow people to create a historic district with maybe provisions in the zoning code that would give it more teeth? Right now, someone could create a district, but we don't have anything locally. We'd have to have a local provision. We'd have to have a local designation for a historic district. And so those are some of the layers we're looking at. But there's been a lot of conversation about some of these neighborhoods that are considered historic or established with some historic properties within them, and how do we look at these decisions that come before you? And so that's why we, is it a place type? Is it an overlay? Is it some acknowledgement that allows us in the future to put that, onto the map to show this area has been officially designated? Or is it something now where we're identifying areas that could have that potential to allow that process to evolve?
All right, and one other question, with the timeline that we have right now to complete our comp plan, how does all what you just said tie into that to keep us on a timeline, or what's it do?
So it works okay, but I guess it'd be tricky if we're calling it historic districts, because we wouldn't have any official districts other than Fort Grounds, which already has its own single-family only designation. So maybe it's historic areas or neighborhoods or something that's the overlay, so it kind of recognizes that future potential. And then as the comp plan and the historic preservation plan are done, then we would look at zoning if there's some action items in there that are supported by planning commission and council.
Which would change after, at some point, we have to adopt our comp plan. I mean,
Yes.
we can go on and on and on and on forever with this, and then it'll be time again, well, we haven't done our comp plan, we've got to update our comp plan that hasn't been updated yet. So I'm looking at, this is all great conversation, but, all right, how do we keep on our timeline to get a comp plan that we want to get completed in a timely manner with all these other little entities coming in now? And, okay, how does that going to work? That's where I'm coming from. Go
Mr. Chair,
ahead.
can we just carve that part out? We recognize that we need to work on this, that it's not quite ripe to put in a final comp plan. It will be at a future date. We're charging ourselves as city and others to flush this out in a year or something like that. And then at that time, come back and incorporate it in our comp plan.
That's a question for Sean and Hillary to kind of address.
If we wait, you're exactly right. We've got to have a date certain we're going to get the comp plan before everybody, and there may be some items just are not quite ripe yet for that. Doesn't mean that we forget them, it just means that we add them at a later date.
And I don't know if that's something,
So, yeah, that's exactly my thought line of what you just said. That's an excellent comment. And so what I think I'm hearing is we define a tool that we wouldn't necessarily employ. So we would have the ability, like a historic place type, for example, but not put it on the map yet. So the tool exists, but it's just not applied yet until some of these things flesh out and we get them in a position to where we can come back and then alter that comp plan map to add that.
and it's similar to what we have in our comp plan now, because I think there's a certain areas that say these are, historic places, and it's very general. It's not like the foregrounds that have gone through and done whatever they wanted to do to designate their area as what it is right now, present date. So, yeah.
Right, the current comp plan has the historical hearts area that kind of identifies parts of the city with that. And I think you're right, the place type would be easy to implement now and just not put it on the map. And then we could also add specific action items related to identifying, historic areas as a future land use or something like that. That might work.
And it might be neighborhoods that all of a sudden, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, say, we want to be a historic district, which is fine, if they follow the process and go through it, so, okay.
That sounds good, thank you.
Back to you, Alex.
Appreciate it. And we do want to get the comp plan adopted. We do want to move it forward. The last question we had was, existing plan unit development. We were talking internally, as we were placing some of these place types. This place type would not necessarily be, kind of setting aside land for future plan unit development. This is really acknowledging that you have a number of existing plan unit developments within the city itself that have their own, development requirements, development, kind of densities and uses. Should we add a place type that acknowledges that? Because they are a bit unique in how they've been designed, and that this would acknowledge that there are certain areas that have their own kind of processes to come to be. And so that would be a new place type that would be applied just to existing plan unit developments within the city.
Yes.
You got a yes
Yeah,
on
and
that
one I'll throw out there is this, like a Bella Reef, and that's one that is kind of complicated. It's in a tough spot. It's been before this commission a number of times for, things to be tweaked and this and that. I think it would be good that all of these kind of are recognized in that manner, and they're a little like historical districts. I think they take a little special attention.
Just like the Atlas waterfront areas.
In the future, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. That was easy. Well, let me just talk about next steps for where we're at. So this was really helpful. I appreciate you kind of bearing with us as we step through some of these questions. This is a difficult thing to put together a new map, and so this input's really helped us, I think, where we can go back and make some modifications and come back to you with a refined map. City Council at our last meeting in February requested that the next, kind of step for this would be to do a joint work session with Planning Commission and City Council to talk about the land use map. And so that would be the next step in this process, and we're looking at a March date potentially to do that. And so after we do that, then we're into the draft plan itself. So we're hoping for March for a joint work session with Planning Commission and City Council on the refined draft land use map to have a conversation about that. And then in April, hopefully coming back to you with the draft plan. And so that's where we would start to get into that formal review of that process and recommendations to City Council when we get into hopefully draft plan adoption in May and June. I think a lot of this schedule, that March date will dictate kind of how quickly we move, but our goal is to have this wrapped up with a plan for you by the June timeframe. So still a fair bit of work to do, but we're definitely getting down to the details in this and moving a lot of these pieces forward.
Alex, with that, I thought it might help the commission to also hear that council did ask for some additional public input. And so we were kind of brainstorming how is the best way to do that? Because at a work session, it's typically not the best place to take public testimony, and you'll have public testimony if it's in April, and then kind of ultimately council will have the options for the public hearings. But we talked about doing a virtual town hall meeting, that might be the best way to, and invite commission and invite council to be there, maybe see if the mayor can open the meeting, allow public testimony, but also have a presentation to lead it off, just to make sure everyone's informed before they provide input and kind of go through the future land use map. It's very complicated with COVID right now, trying to get everybody together and gather community input, but recognizing that it's an update to the comp plan, plus it has the new layers of a future land use map and other things. I can see, why there's interest in, we've had a lot of community input, but I think just one more touch, I think to get some input would help the council feel a little more comfortable taking the step of incorporating the future land use map. So we'll flesh out those details and let you know how we'll roll that out, but we'll make sure it's interactive and meaningful for the public as well.
With the COVID
Which is why that says tentative schedule at the top.
whether-
So we're trying to make sure we can get it all to fit. So
With the COVID restrictions, and I assume they're diminishing over time, the nicer weather, is there a possibility that people can congregate outside at a social distance and come in here on a couple people at a time to give public testimony in addition or instead of Zoom? If, as the time comes, there's more, well, I feel it's more effective if people come in person. But I understand you have to be apart and so forth, and some of us have gotten our shots recently, and there's social distancing there in pretty big rooms and big places, and maybe something like that can occur here outside. We set up tables or chairs, and people draw numbers and come in and testify whenever they want, when they want to, and then have a loudspeaker out there, or maybe even a television set, so people outside can hear what's going on in here. So it would be a big meeting, yet you'll be socially distanced, and only people will come in, fixed number to give their testimony, then leave, and another group come in.
We could certainly look into that. I think it's going to be very challenging
Oh,
logistically.
it will not be easy.
Right, because we even looked at North Idaho College to see if we could use one of their larger rooms to accommodate a joint work session and the public, and they're not open for that.
That
We
didn't
can't
work?
do that, no. And so here, we're limited on space, and then if we're trying to still allow Zoom and have kind of that format and record the meeting and, all the other things with it, it's definitely going to be a challenge. But we can look at options and then kind of get back to you and the council on what that
Well, our
feasible format would be.
people will be much different than they were down at the courthouse here a couple, 3-4 months ago when they were talking about the vaccine and so forth, that they had brought people in and they gave their testimony and they stood outside and it was, I'm not suggesting that that's the type of people to testify here, because it was a little unruly. I think ours would be more ruly and more disciplined, if you will, to be social distance. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alex, you got some more for us, or?
I don't. I just want to, again, thank you for the time. This has been a lot of stuff to go through, but we were able to step through place types, make some potential revisions to that. We've been able to, step through that land use map and actually, I think, provide some really good information for us to go back and think about that commercial / mixed use and scale. So this has been great for us. And as I say, next steps, we'll take this information and go back into that draft map and refine that. And then, the next time coming back with something that's, relatively complete for you to review and provide comment and input on. So this has been, it helps us tremendously to help push this piece forward. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Hillary, Sean, you have anything to add? You guys got enough of additional information?
Yeah, I believe we have enough to really start working on the map, and we'll bring forward something that is a little more defined, a little more refined. We just wanted to check in with Planning Commission, make sure we're heading in the right direction, have this discussion, understand where concerns were, where areas of the city needed a little more attention, and I think we've gotten that tonight. So thank you.
Okay, good. Hillary?
Thank you. Just appreciate everyone really diving in with us on this complex but very important project.
As long as we get our plan done at some point in time, that's
Yes.
where I'm at.
Yes, that is the
We're
goal.
We can add to it as
Get
we
it
go
done.
along down the road, but I think we need to focus on let's getting it done, so we go from there.
I think
And
we're
Lynn, I
getting
like
close.
your dog.
Yeah, Commissioner Fleming.
She's yawning. She's a little bored. Yeah,
Dog
she's
needs a
yawning.
nap.
She's a tad
Okay,
bored.
Alex, if nothing else, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
once again.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess we just
we-
need a formal adjournment, and then
Do we need to formal close the meeting, or we're
we
done?
didn't have any action items, so it would just be the motion to adjourn would be
We're,
the last step.
anybody
Motion to
else?
adjourn.
We're done. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate
Very
it.
good.
And I'll call the meeting to
problem.
a close. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
All
See ya.
right.